My parents kicked me out into the freezing street with absolutely $0 to my name. 15 years later, they showed up in the pristine marble lobby of my multi-million-dollar company, holding giant banners and throwing a massive, public tantrum. It was a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. I was sitting behind the custom mahogany desk in my corner office on the 42nd floor, looking out over the stunning city skyline. I had spent the last decade and a half bleeding, sweating, and crying to build my tech firm from a dusty, unheated garage into an absolute industry powerhouse. I was taking a slow sip of my morning espresso, reviewing our record-breaking quarterly profits, and feeling completely at peace with the beautiful, successful life I had created for myself. Then, the red emergency line on my desk phone suddenly started flashing. It was Marcus, my head of security. He was a heavily built former Marine who never flinched at anything, but right now, his voice was tight and filled with absolute panic. "Boss, I am so sorry to interrupt," Marcus said over the line, struggling to speak over a loud commotion in the background. "We have a major situation down in the main lobby. There's a group of people causing an absolute riot. They brought megaphones, some local vloggers are already filming, and, well, they're screaming to anyone who will listen that they are your parents." I completely stopped breathing. The warm espresso in my hand suddenly felt like ice. My parents. The very same people who discarded me like literal garbage when I was just a teenager. I hadn't seen their faces or heard their voices in 15 agonizing years. I put my coffee cup down, my hands trembling just a fraction of an inch, and slowly walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass window. I looked down at the tiny figures swarming the grand glass entrance of my building far below. Even from this height, I could see the bright red banners waving in the air. I didn't even need to hear what they were shouting through those megaphones to know exactly why they had suddenly decided to resurrect themselves from my past. They smelled the money. And they were here to completely destroy my peace. To understand why my own parents were currently staging a full-blown protest in my lobby, I have to take you back to a freezing December night exactly 15 years ago. I had just turned 18. While other kids my age were applying to colleges and planning their senior prom, I was working 2 part-time jobs just to pay for my own groceries, because every single spare cent my parents had went straight to my older brother, Kevin. Kevin was the undisputed, untouchable, golden child of the family. He could do absolutely no wrong in my parents' eyes. If he failed a test, it was the teacher's fault. If he crashed the family car, the road was too slippery. But his reckless behavior eventually escalated into something they couldn't just sweep under the rug. Kevin had secretly developed a massive gambling addiction. Over the course of 6 months, he completely drained my parents' emergency savings and managed to get himself into tens of thousands of dollars in debt with some extremely dangerous, shady loan sharks. When those aggressive men finally showed up banging on our front door demanding their money, my parents were absolutely terrified. But instead of holding their precious son accountable, they did the unthinkable. To protect Kevin from going to jail or getting hurt, my mother looked the police and the debt collectors dead in the eye and completely fabricated a story. She pointed a shaking finger at me and cried, claiming that I was the one who had stolen the family money to fund a wild, out-of-control lifestyle. She told them Kevin was just an innocent victim trying to cover for his troubled younger sister. I was completely paralyzed with shock. I begged, I pleaded, I swore on my life that I didn't even know how to play poker, let alone owe money to loan sharks. But my parents screamed at me to get out of their sight. They didn't just throw me under the bus, they physically threw me out of the house. I will never, ever forget the biting, painful cold of that winter night. As I was being shoved out the front door, my father violently snatched my winter coat and my cheap cell phone right out of my hands. He looked at me with absolute disgust and said, "We bought these, so they belong to us. You are dead to this family." He slammed the heavy front door perfectly shut, and I heard the deadbolt lock click. I stood alone on the icy concrete porch, violently shivering in a thin cotton t-shirt and ripped jeans. I had no phone, no ID, no winter coat, and exactly $0 to my name. I was an 18-year-old girl thrown to the wolves in the dead of winter, simply because my parents needed a convenient scapegoat for their golden child. Looking down from my 42nd floor office window now, Watching them wave their pathetic red banners, my heart didn't break. It didn't even skip a beat. That terrified, freezing 18-year-old girl died on that icy porch 15 years ago. The woman standing here today was forged entirely in fire. How I actually survived that freezing first night is still a blur. I remember walking nearly 3 miles in the biting snow until I found a 24-hour diner. The night manager took one look at my shivering, blue lips and let me sleep in a warm storage closet in exchange for scrubbing the kitchen floors. For the next 5 years, my life was a grueling, brutal masterclass in pure survival. While my brother Kevin was probably sleeping in his warm, comfortable bed, I was working 3 minimum wage jobs simultaneously. I washed greasy dishes until my hands literally cracked and bled. I worked double shifts as a waitress, dealing with screaming customers just so I could eat the leftover fries off their plates. I eventually saved up enough to buy a beat-up, $500 used car from a junkyard, and that cramped back seat became my home for 2 entire years. I didn't have a social life. I didn't go to college parties or date. Instead, I spent every single night sitting in the dark corner of a 24-hour public library, aggressively drinking cheap black coffee and using their free Wi-Fi to teach myself coding, software engineering, and business management. Whenever my body felt like shutting down, whenever the exhaustion was so heavy I just wanted to cry and give up, I would hear the heavy click of that deadbolt locking behind me. I didn't run on motivation. I ran on pure, unadulterated spite. The absolute. Betrayal by my own flesh and blood became my rocket fuel. I became obsessed with building a life so massive and untouchable that nobody could ever throw me away again. By the time I was 22, I launched my first software program out of a damp, windowless rented garage. I pitched my ideas to hundreds of wealthy investors and got laughed out of boardrooms more times than I can count. But I never stopped pushing. Eventually, one investor took a chance on me, and that tiny garage project exploded into the multi-million-dollar tech empire I own today. I pulled myself out of the dark memories and took a deep breath, stepping away from the floor-to-ceiling window of my 42nd floor office. My heart wasn't racing anymore. The fear that used to choke me when I thought of my parents was completely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I walked over to my desk and pressed the glowing button on my intercom system to connect back to Marcus, my head of security. "Marcus," I said, my voice completely steady and void of any emotion. "Tell your guards to stand down. Do not call the police to remove them just yet." There was a brief pause on the line before Marcus replied, sounding confused. "Stand down, ma'am? But they're actively harassing the staff." "I know," I replied, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored blazer. "Let them scream. Let them gather a crowd. Because I'm coming down there to handle this myself." As I stepped into my private executive elevator and pressed the glowing button for the ground floor, I had exactly 42 floors of silence to mentally prepare myself for the absolute circus waiting below. I already knew exactly how they had found me. For 15 years, I was a ghost. I had legally changed my last name, moved to a completely different state, and built my life in total privacy. But you can only hide your success for so long when your company is about to go public. Exactly 3 weeks ago, my face was plastered across the front cover of a major national business magazine for a Top Entrepreneurs Under 40 feature. It was a massive, celebratory milestone for my company and my team, but it also acted as a giant, glowing beacon for the leeches from my past. My corporate private investigation team, whom I had immediately put on standby the second the magazine hit the stands, just in case, had quickly confirmed my worst suspicions. My precious golden child older brother, Kevin, hadn't changed one single bit. At 35 years old, he was chronically unemployed, completely unhireable, and still living in my parents' basement. Worse, he was drowning in a fresh mountain of shady, high-interest debt. And my parents? They had blindly remortgaged their house 3 separate times to bail him out of his messes over the years, and the bank was literally weeks away from foreclosing on their property. They were desperate, cornered, and completely broke. And then, one random Tuesday, they probably walked into a grocery store, glanced at the magazine rack, and saw the very same daughter they had thrown into the freezing street sitting in a tailored designer suit, labeled as a multi-millionaire tech CEO. The math in their heads must have clicked instantly. They didn't try to call me privately. They didn't try to send an email or a letter to apologize for destroying my teenage years. No, they spent the last 3 weeks meticulously planning this exact, highly calculated public ambush. They knew that a CEO of a major tech firm would be absolutely terrified of a PR nightmare. They figured if they showed up in my pristine corporate lobby, crying, holding banners, and screaming to the public about how their cruel, billionaire daughter abandoned them to starve, I would panic. They genuinely believed I would drag them into a private back room and write them a massive, quiet hush-money check just to make the scandal go away. They thought they could use my hard-earned reputation as a weapon to extort me. Ding! The elevator chimed cheerfully as it reached the ground floor. The heavy silver doors slowly slid open, and the deafening, echoing sound of my mother's fake, theatrical sobbing instantly flooded into the cabin. I adjusted my blazer, kept my posture perfectly straight, and stepped out into the lobby. It was showtime. The moment my heels clicked against the pristine marble floor of the main lobby, the sheer scale of their circus became clear. There were at least 50 people gathered around the reception area. Employees on their coffee breaks, delivery drivers, and random pedestrians who had wandered in off the street were all standing in a massive circle, holding up their smartphones. The flash from their cameras reflected off the glass walls, capturing every single second of the chaos. Right in the center of the crowd were my parents. My father was holding a cheap plastic megaphone, aggressively pointing up at the gold company logo on the wall. Behind him, aggressively taped directly onto my custom reception desk, was a massive, bright yellow banner with thick red letters that read, "CEO abandons elderly parents to starve." My mother was putting on an absolute Oscar-worthy performance. She was sitting on one of the expensive leather lobby sofas, dramatically clutching her chest and sobbing hysterically. She had intentionally worn faded, oversized clothes to look as pathetic and destitute as humanly possible. She was violently shaking her shoulders, wiping her completely dry eyes with a crumpled tissue. "We gave her everything," my father boomed through the megaphone, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "We sacrificed our entire lives to raise her, and now she refuses to even buy her starving mother a warm meal." What kind of monster does that? The crowd was eating it up. I could hear people whispering, gasping, and muttering to each other about how incredibly heartless and greedy I must be. Then, my mother's eyes darted across the lobby and locked onto me standing perfectly still by the elevators. The transition was instantaneous and honestly terrifying. She immediately dropped the frail, heartbroken victim act. A spark of pure, greedy triumph flashed in her eyes. She practically leaped off the leather sofa, threw her arms wide open, and rushed toward me. "My baby! Oh, my beautiful girl, you came down to see us," she wailed loudly, her voice dripping with fake emotion, making absolutely sure every single phone camera was capturing the moment. She was going for the ultimate, tear-jerking, public reunion hug. She wanted to trap me in an embrace in front of an audience, so I couldn't walk away without looking like a complete villain on camera. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I just casually raised 2 fingers in the air. Instantly, Marcus and 3 towering security guards in sharp black suits stepped directly in front of me, forming a massive, impenetrable wall of muscle. My mother slammed right into Marcus's broad chest and bounced back, looking incredibly shocked and deeply offended that I had actually denied her the photo op. "Don't you dare touch her," my father yelled, dropping the megaphone and rushing forward to stand next to my mother. He glared aggressively at my security team. "That is our daughter. We have every right to speak to her. Tell your goons to back off right now." The entire lobby went dead quiet. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. 50 phone cameras were pointed directly at my face, waiting for the guilty billionaire CEO to crack under the massive public pressure, apologize, and quietly drag her poor parents into a private backroom with a checkbook. Instead, I slowly stepped around my security guards, looked my mother dead in the eye, and completely shattered their expectations. Before I could even utter a single word to my mother, a third figure confidently stepped out from behind a massive marble pillar, carrying himself like he owned the entire building. It was the golden child himself. My older brother, Kevin. I hadn't seen him in 15 years, but he hadn't changed at all. At 35 years old, he was still wearing the exact same arrogant, entitled smirk he had when he was 20. He was dressed in a cheap, poorly fitted gray suit that he was desperately trying to pass off as designer, complete with a massive, painfully obvious fake gold watch on his wrist. He walked right past my sobbing mother, dramatically put a comforting hand on her shoulder for the cameras, and glared at me with absolute sheer audacity. "Look at you," Kevin scoffed, shaking his head in mock disgust, making sure his voice carried perfectly to the vloggers recording us. "Standing there in your expensive clothes, surrounded by bodyguards, while the people who literally gave you life are begging for scraps. You are a disgusting, ungrateful narcissist." A few people in the crowd actually murmured in agreement. Kevin smirked, clearly feeling emboldened by the audience. He had spent his entire life being treated like the center of the universe, and his main character syndrome was currently on full display. He took another step forward, pulling his shoulders back, ready to deliver the final, killing blow that he and my parents had undoubtedly rehearsed in their basement. "But luckily for you, we are a forgiving family," Kevin announced loudly, playing the role of the merciful, heroic brother. "Mom and Dad are willing to drop all of this. We will walk out of here quietly and keep your horrible behavior out of the press, but it's going to cost you." He actually reached into his cheap suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, waving it around like a legal document. "First," Kevin demanded, reading from his little list, "you are going to write a check right now for $500,000. You can call it back pay for all the years Mom and Dad supported you. Second, to make sure you never neglect your family again, you are going to instantly appoint me as the Vice President of Operations of this company, with the full executive salary and benefits." The absolute, mind-blowing delusion of this man. He was standing in the lobby of a company I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears, demanding $500,000 to pay off his shady loan sharks, and asking to be handed a C-suite executive position despite having 0 college degree and 0 work experience. And he genuinely, truly believed that because there were 50 cell phones pointed at me, I was going to panic and say yes. My father nodded aggressively in the background. "It's the least you can do to repay us," he shouted. Kevin crossed his arms, tapping his fake gold watch, waiting for my corporate-approved, PR-friendly surrender. He expected me to beg them to step into my office. He expected me to hand him the keys to my kingdom just to avoid a scandal. Instead, I looked at him, looked at my parents, and finally let out a soft, genuine laugh. My soft, genuine laugh echoed off the marble walls, completely catching them off guard. Kevin's arrogant smirk faltered for a split second, and my mother stopped her fake sobbing to stare at me in pure confusion. They had spent 3 weeks anticipating every possible reaction from me: anger, panic, embarrassment, or desperate bargaining. The one thing they hadn't prepared for was me finding them absolutely hilarious. $500,000 and a VP title? I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the dead silent air so everyone in the lobby could hear just how completely absurd they sounded. "Kevin, you couldn't even successfully manage a child's lemonade stand without bankrupting it, let alone run the operations of a publicly traded tech firm." My father's face turned bright, angry red. "Don't you dare speak to your brother like that," he yelled, raising his cheap plastic megaphone again. "You are going to give him what he deserves right now, or we are calling the local news stations and ruining your company." Instead of calling Marcus to physically drag them out kicking and screaming, which is exactly what they wanted me to do so they could cry about police brutality and play the ultimate victims, I simply raised my hand. I signaled my security team to step back, completely opening the floor. I stepped forward, closing the distance between me and my so-called family. I didn't look angry. I looked utterly bored. I turned my head and looked over at my executive assistant, Sarah, who was standing nervously near the reception desk. "Sarah," I said calmly, making sure my voice projected clearly across the lobby. Please go to the AV room and bring me a wireless microphone. If my family wants to hold a public press conference about our history, I think it's only fair that I get to participate. I want to make sure every single person recording this on their phone hears my response loud and clear. The exact moment I asked for the microphone, the dynamic in the room violently shifted. My mother's eyes widened in genuine, unscripted panic. She looked at my father, her face turning pale. Kevin aggressively swallowed hard, his fake confidence evaporating as he instinctively took a half-step backward. The illusion of their control was completely shattering right in front of them. They thought they were ambushing a scared, traumatized 18-year-old girl who would do anything to keep a secret. They realized, far too late, that they hadn't trapped me in a public spectacle. I had just trapped them in mine. Sarah practically sprinted back from the AV room and handed me the sleek black wireless microphone. I turned it on and the sharp, electronic beep echoed through the massive lobby, instantly silencing the few remaining whispers in the crowd. I didn't even look at my parents. I turned my back to them and faced the ring of smartphones and vloggers directly. For anyone live streaming this right now, please make sure you are getting the audio loud and clear, I started, my voice booming smoothly through the lobby's built-in sound system. The three people standing behind me are absolutely right about one thing. They are, unfortunately, my biological family. But let me tell you exactly why they haven't seen me in 15 years, and why I wouldn't give them a single penny if they were begging on the street. My father panicked and tried to lunge forward to grab the microphone, but Marcus seamlessly stepped in, putting a massive hand squarely on his chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. 15 years ago, on a freezing December night, I continued, my voice ice-cold and razor-sharp, my dear, sweet brother Kevin here developed a massive, out-of-control gambling addiction. He completely drained our family's emergency savings and racked up tens of thousands of dollars in debt to some extremely violent local loan sharks. I paused for a fraction of a second, letting the weight of the words settle over the crowd. When those men showed up at our front door demanding their money, my loving parents didn't hold their precious son accountable. Instead, to protect him, my mother lied to the police and the debt collectors. She pointed her finger at me, an innocent 18-year-old high school student, and framed me for the entire debt. Then, my father physically dragged me out the front door, ripped my winter coat off my back, confiscated my phone, and threw me onto the icy concrete with exactly $0 to my name. A loud, collective gasp ripped through the lobby. You could hear a pin drop. A few of the vloggers lowered their phones, looking at my parents with absolute, unfiltered disgust. The narrative had completely flipped in less than 60 seconds. They left me out there to freeze so their golden boy wouldn't have to face the consequences of his own actions, I concluded, slowly turning around to face my mother. She was now shaking for real, her fake tears completely dried up, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. You're lying. She's making it all up. She's a psychotic liar. Kevin shrieked, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of 50 people suddenly staring at him like he was a monster. Am I? I asked, completely unfazed, holding the microphone perfectly steady. Because unlike you, Kevin, I don't make business claims I can't back up with hard data. I snapped my fingers at my assistant, Sarah, signaling for the next phase of my plan. It was time to show them just how deeply I had prepared for this exact moment. Sarah stepped forward from the reception desk and handed me a thick, heavy manila folder. I didn't even open it. I just held it up high for every single smartphone camera to clearly see. The moment my face was published on the cover of that business magazine 3 weeks ago, I knew it was only a matter of time before the rats crawled out of the woodwork, I said smoothly into the microphone. So, I immediately put my company's private investigation team on standby. And the financial background check they ran on the three of you is absolutely fascinating. I casually tossed the heavy folder directly onto the marble floor at Kevin's feet. The loud smack of the paper hitting the ground made him physically jump. You see, ladies and gentlemen, these three aren't here because they suddenly missed the daughter they threw away, I announced, pacing slowly in front of them like a predator circling its prey. They are here because they are completely out of options. My parents have secretly remortgaged their house 3 separate times over the last decade to bail Kevin out of his endless failures. And as of this morning, their bank is exactly 14 days away from a total foreclosure. They are about to be homeless. My father's jaw completely dropped. The megaphone slipped from his grip and clattered onto the floor. My mother looked like she was going to be physically sick. And my dear brother Kevin? I smiled, pointing directly at his pale, sweating face. Kevin isn't looking for a corporate vice president position. He is currently under active investigation for a massive cryptocurrency fraud scheme. He owes exactly $500,000 to some very angry investors, and if he doesn't pay them back by the end of the month, he is going straight to federal prison. The lobby absolutely erupted. The quiet whispers instantly turned into loud, vocal disgust. People were actively jeering. Someone in the back actually yelled, "Get a job, you scammer." The vloggers zoomed their cameras right into Kevin's terrified, humiliated face. The crowd they had specifically gathered to use as a weapon against me had just turned into their very own firing squad. "You didn't come here for family," I said, dropping my voice to a dangerous, quiet tone that echoed perfectly through the lobby. "You came here because you needed a human ATM. You genuinely thought you could use my hard-earned reputation and the threat of a public PR scandal to extort me into cleaning up your pathetic, criminal messes one more time." I took one final step closer to them, my eyes locked onto my brother's. He was shaking so hard his fake gold watch was rattling against his wrist. "But you made a massive miscalculation," I whispered into the microphone, making sure the entire room heard it. "I am not the scared little 18-year-old girl you threw into the snow anymore. I am the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation. And you just brought a plastic megaphone to a corporate gunfight." The absolute humiliation of being publicly exposed in front of dozens of rolling cameras finally made Kevin snap. The reality that his fake, entitled world was collapsing right in front of him completely shattered his fragile ego. His face contorted into pure, desperate rage. "You arrogant B***tch," he screamed, his voice cracking violently. He lunged forward with his fists raised, completely forgetting where he was and who he was dealing with. He didn't even make it 2 steps. Marcus, my head of security, didn't even break a sweat. He simply reached out, grabbed Kevin by the lapels of his cheap, poorly fitted suit, and effortlessly slammed him against the nearest marble pillar. He pinned him there like he weighed absolutely nothing. Kevin instantly started squirming and squealing. His tough guy act completely destroyed the second he faced actual physical consequences. My mother shrieked in horror, winding up to throw another theatrical tantrum about how we were assaulting her baby. But before she could even open her mouth to play the victim again, the sleek glass doors of the executive elevator behind me slid open with a soft ding. Out walked 3 men and 2 women in impeccably tailored, $1,000 suits, each carrying a thick legal document portfolio. This wasn't just my security detail. This was my company's elite corporate legal team. I didn't deal with toxic family drama through screaming matches or physical fights. I dealt with it legally, and I dealt with it ruthlessly. My lead attorney, a terrifyingly sharp man named Harrison, calmly walked past me. He didn't say a single word. He just handed a thick envelope directly to my father, who was staring at his violently shaking hands, and then shoved another envelope right into Kevin's chest while Marcus held him against the pillar. What is this?" my father stammered, his face completely drained of color as he looked at the heavy legal seal on the front of the envelope. I raised the microphone one last time, making sure the entire lobby and the internet heard the absolute finality in my voice. "Those are official cease and desist orders, along with permanent trespass notices covering me, my employees, and all of my company's properties," I announced smoothly. "But more importantly, they're official notices of intent to sue for a massive civil lawsuit." The crowd in the lobby went completely silent again, leaning in to catch every word. "You see, you made a very critical error today," I explained, looking directly at my parents' horrified faces. "You didn't just show up to a house to yell at your estranged daughter. You marched into the headquarters of a publicly traded corporation, intentionally disrupted our business operations, and publicly attempted to extort a CEO for $500,000 while threatening a PR smear campaign. I took a step back, handing the microphone to Sarah, and gave my family one final, icy smile. That is called corporate extortion and defamation. You wanted to pay up? Instead, my legal team is going to legally drain whatever tiny fraction of pennies you have left to your names, right before Kevin goes to federal prison. Have a wonderful Tuesday. As if on perfect cue with my final words, the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass doors of the main lobby suddenly illuminated with the harsh, flashing reflection of red and blue lights. I had instructed Marcus to silently dispatch the local police the absolute second my parents walked into the building. I specifically requested that security hold the officers outside for exactly 10 minutes so I could personally control the narrative and handle the public PR aspect myself. Now, their timing was absolutely cinematic. For uniformed police officers pushed through the revolving doors, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. The crowd of employees and vloggers immediately parted like the Red Sea to let them through. We received a call regarding severe trespassing and disorderly conduct, along with an active complaint for attempted extortion, the lead officer announced, taking in the chaotic scene. He immediately looked over at Harrison, my lead attorney, who simply nodded with a polite smile and handed the officer a perfectly organized copy of our legal filings and the freshly printed trespass notices. My mother completely lost her mind. The fake, theatrical tears from earlier were instantly replaced by genuine, blind terror. She dropped to her knees right there on the cold marble floor, desperately grabbing at the hem of my tailored blazer. Please, you can't do this, she shrieked, her voice echoing hysterically. We are your family. We gave you life. You can't let them arrest your own mother. I casually took a step back, smoothly pulling my blazer out of her frantic grip. I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely zero emotion in my chest. I don't have a family, I said quietly, looking her dead in the eyes. My family died in the snow 15 years ago. You are just a criminal trespassing on my property. Without missing a beat, Marcus effortlessly unpinned Kevin from the marble pillar and shoved him directly toward the waiting officers. The sheer, absolute panic on my older brother's face as the cold metal handcuffs loudly clicked around his wrists was a level of satisfying karma I will never, ever forget. He was actually sobbing, crying like a spoiled toddler, begging the officers to let him go while the vloggers he had tried to weaponize against me zoomed their cameras right into his tear-stained face. My father tried to resist, aggressively arguing and pointing his finger at the police, but he was quickly spun around, slammed against the reception desk, and handcuffed as well. What followed was the ultimate, undisputed walk of shame. The three of them were forcefully marched out of my pristine lobby in a single file line. They were completely humiliated, their heads bowed in absolute, crushing defeat, while 50 different smartphone cameras live-streamed their spectacular downfall to the entire internet. As they were dragged toward the exit, my father's heavy boots accidentally stepped directly onto the bright yellow banner they had taped to my desk earlier. The massive red letters, "CEO abandons elderly parents," were violently smeared and trampled under the dirty shoes of the police officers escorting them out. The trash was finally taking itself out. Once the heavy glass doors of the lobby finally slid shut behind the police officers, the chaotic, frantic energy in the room completely evaporated. I turned to the crowd of stunned employees, politely thanked them for their patience during the disruption, and gave Marcus a quiet, appreciative nod. Then I turned around and stepped back into my private executive elevator. The ride back up to the 42nd floor was completely, blissfully silent. When I walked back into my corner office, everything was exactly as I had left it just 30 minutes ago. The morning sun was still shining brightly through the glass. The city skyline was still stunning. My multi-million-dollar company was still thriving. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the streets far below. I watched the tiny, flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers merge into the heavy city traffic, carrying the toxic ghosts of my past away for good. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad or bitter. For the first time in 15 agonizing years, the heavy weight in my chest was completely gone. I just felt entirely, unapologetically free. As I turned away from the glass, my cell phone buzzed gently on my custom mahogany desk. It was a text message from my husband. It was a candid photo of our beautiful 6-year-old daughter sitting at our kitchen island, her face playfully covered in pancake syrup, holding up a messy finger painting she had just made for me. Underneath the picture, my husband's text read, "Your two biggest fans are so proud of you. We love you. Can't wait for dinner tonight." A genuine, warm smile spread across my face. I picked up the phone, staring at the photo of the beautiful, safe, and loving life I had built from absolute scratch. If there is one thing I want anyone listening to this story to take away, it is this: family is absolutely not defined by blood, DNA, or a shared last name. Just because someone happened to give birth to you does not give them a lifetime, unconditional pass to abuse, manipulate, or destroy you. Real family are the people who fiercely protect your peace. They are the people who celebrate your wins, and the people who would never, ever let you freeze in the dark. 15 years ago, the people who were supposed to love me the most threw me to the wolves, hoping I wouldn't survive the winter. They wanted to break me so they could protect their golden child. But all they did was hand me the exact motivation I needed to build an absolute empire. The absolute best revenge you can ever get on toxic, abusive people isn't screaming matches or physical fights. The ultimate revenge is cutting them off, healing your own heart, and living a massively, undeniably brilliant life entirely without them.